When I look at the American economy, we just saw last 2 days we had 210,000 new jobs in America. And yet the unemployment rate went up 0.1%. Now, believe it or not, that's a good news story. And I give the press credit, they all said that. It means people are beginning to come across off the sidelines and go back to work. We are just as close to being able to rise again. I know that the headlines in Wyoming are not good today because of the coal layoffs, but it's a cyclical industry, and you had a warm winter, and you got all this natural gas production, and you have to deal with it. But in the end, we're going to be phasing into a new energy future, but it's going to be a long time, and Wyoming has the most efficient and lowest sulfur content in the country and virtually in the world. So this is a cyclical thing here. I want to say a little more about the clean energy standards in a minute, because I know they're about as popular as stage 4 cancer here, but it's an opportunity for you because it only applies to Wyoming, and most of your business is exports. And it's really important to remember that, and I'll say more about it in a minute. But the thing I was proudest of when I was given the chance to serve is that we all rose together. And it's the only time that I can remember when the bottom 20% of workers' income in percentage terms increased more than the top 20%. When we moved 100 times as many people moved out of poverty into the middle class as when President Reagan was in office. We had only 40% more jobs, but 100 times as many people moved out of poverty because we grew this economy from the middle out and the bottom up, and we all rose together. We also had an unprecedented new relationship with tribal leaders all across America. I was the first president since James Monroe in the 1820s to invite the leaders of all the tribes to the White House to meet with me, and they all came. I learned a lot, and Hillary learned a lot because she went out to visit a lot of the reservation lands around the country that, you know, it's like every other community in America. There's a lot of diversity there. There are the ones that are rich on casino income and the ones that don't have it. They still have the lowest incomes in America, and we can't forget that. If we're all going to rise together, we have to all rise together. So let me just talk about that a little bit. What our challenge is to deal with the fact that we have to, excuse me, let me drink some water. If you ride on too many airplanes, that happens. Of all the big economies in the world, ours is performing the best. We got 14 million jobs in the last 5 years. That's the most since that other Democrat was president, whatever his name is. And we have 90% of our people with health insurance for the first time in the history of the country. And if you take Medicaid, we're going to make a big difference. We have the youngest, most diverse workforce in the world. We have the best science and technology base. We got the best education and training base. We just got to make it affordable and debt manageable. We are in good shape for the future. And as Wyoming knows, if you look at all these windmills, every scientific survey, and our party still believes in science, says, every scientific survey says that the U.S. ranks first or second in the world in the capacity to power our own economy with the sun and the wind. And it's a great opportunity for Wyoming because, with the exception of California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Florida, by and large in the United States, the sun shines brightest and the wind blows hardest where the people are not. But there's a guy in northern Wyoming, northwest Wyoming, a private developer who's built this huge wind farm and paid for the transmission line to take it to California where there are a lot of people and they have to get 30% of their energy from renewable resources within the next few years. one of Hillary's commitments is to make sure that those opportunities are available to people who don't have $1 billion. You think about this. Every Native American tribe, for example, west of the Mississippi, could be doing the same thing. And think about the jobs that would be created in Wyoming if we decided to maximize your capacity to export wind as you export coal. What would you have to do? You'd have to hire people to build the transmission lines to connect them to where the people are. It would create zillions of jobs that could never be exported. They wouldn't be subject to foreign competition. They wouldn't be subject to variations in the weather. And it would create a whole new economy for people here. But you got to have a president committed to make those investments and somebody who knows how to get that done. That's one of the things that she wants to do. She wants to put up 500 million solar panels in the next 4 years and make sure every American home can control its own power. You can't export the jobs. You can make the stuff here, and it would give us a whole new future. That's the first thing I wanted to say. We've got to do this. The other thing I think is important to remember is that we can bring manufacturing back to America now in a way we've never done before. Totally different. There have been 900,000 new manufacturing jobs in this country come back since the crash 8 years ago. And it's just the beginning. Why? Because, as you know here, living in a rural state, labor costs are by far not the only thing that determines whether you're competitive in making stuff. In fact, manufacturing's gotten so efficient that the main determinants are transportation, materials, and energy costs. So her position is, why don't we stop importing so much stuff and save the transportation and make this stuff in America, pay people good wages, and we can change the whole structure of the American economy. That applies everywhere. I know when I was a governor and I came here running for president, we were one of only 8 states in the country that had gained manufacturing jobs in the 1980s. Because I could see all this happening, and I realized that people just weren't thinking it through, that if we were smart about it, we could grow that sector of the economy. And the final thing that Hillary, I think, is the only person in either party talking about is that in the last 20 years, 2/3 of our new jobs have come from small businesses. And the real problem with the banking system today is not whether Wall Street can wreck Main Street again. That cannot happen because of the Dodd-Frank law, which I think, next to health care, was the second most important bill President Obama signed. And why? I'll give you an example of a place that seems a world away to you. In New York City, where I have my foundation office and my office of a former president, it's got one of the fastest growing economies in America, but there's somewhere between 50 and 70,000 fewer people working in finance. Why? Because they can't take those risky investments anymore. Because they got to have more money if they do take risks. Because we're never going to bail them out again, and we're never going to let them wreck the economy again. And I don't care what anybody in any party comes here and tells you, the law we've got today is better than anything we had for 50 years before. That's not the problem. The problem is too many bankers all across America are so burned by what happened before, they're not making loans to small business like they ought to. And what Hillary wants to do is to change the incentives and enforce a law that I enforce vigorously called the Community Reinvestment Law, which basically says any bank, however big they are, has to make a certain amount of loans to the people who put deposits there and use their ATMs. And if you do that, you'll have a boom in small businesses starting again. This is all important. And it'll work in every state in America, wherever, however big or small. Now, the problem now is that there are still too many barriers for everybody participating. I mentioned the barriers that Native Americans on tribal lands without gambling face. You got to get investment in there. And you need to pass this Medicaid expansion. I applaud. Republican governor, and I know that some of you here have a lot to do with it, for asking the legislature to change their mind on this. Here's what I know. Every single state in America that has done this has generated more revenues than the 10% state match cost, and has generated more jobs, and has saved rural hospitals. This is a rural state. How are these people supposed to treat everybody that shows up if their care is uncompensated? There are a few states in America that would be more benefited by expanding the Medicaid than Wyoming. It would really make a difference. And a lot of these primaries, it's been kind of ugly what they've said on the other side, implying that the only people that benefit from this are people of color on welfare. That's not true. Medicaid takes care of really poor people today all across the country. The people that would benefit from this are working class people who are working for modest wages, whose kids can't get the health care they need, whose parents can't get the health care they need. It would do more than you can imagine. I'm from Arkansas, as you all know, and it's moved way Republican in the last few years for reasons that aren't pretty, but they did. My Democratic governor left office in 2015 in January with a 70% approval rating because we cut the number of people without health insurance in half. And overwhelmingly, the beneficiaries were the white working class. And then they voted for legislators that promised to repeal the Medicaid expansion. So now they're tying themselves in pretzels back home because they know if they do it, they're going to throw 200,000 of their own voters off of health care. And so they're trying to do bells and whistles and twist around and pretend they're not doing what they're doing, which is keeping something that is making our state stronger and better. And the same thing will happen here. You need to take the expansion. And Hillary wants to make sure we have equal investments among all communities, including tribal communities, where the healthcare disparities are still very significant in the way the funding comes. That's a big deal. And if you do it, it'll help us all rise together.